Hi everyone, and welcome to your Ornament Girl tutorial. My name is Kennedy, and today I'll be showing you how to make the Liberty Square pattern. Make sure you check out the link in the description below to download your free printable supply list for everything you'll need to make this ornament. In order to complete this pattern, you'll need a soft foam cube, satin straight pins, fabric, ribbon, trim, white beads, hanger string, fabric scissors, and a flexible tape measure. Be sure to click the link below the video to download your supply list to give you the accurate measurements and quantities for all of these materials. Once you have everything gathered, we can start your Liberty Square ornament. Alright, to get started on your ornament, you'll need a 5 by 5 inch square of fabric number 1. You're going to lay this down on your working surface with the pattern side facing away from you, and just center your foam square or your foam cube right on top of that fabric piece. You don't have to be exact, you just want to leave enough fabric on each side that you can fold over and pin. And once you have that foam placed on the fabric, we're gonna just slide it off our working surface, holding them both together so that you can flip it over and have that fabric laid across the foam. And now on each side, we're just going to smooth that fabric over the edge of the foam and pin it into the side of the foam there. I'm pinning down here near the raw edge, and you're just going to pin with, I would use 3 pins on each side, one in the middle, one toward the left and the right, just to keep that fabric edge in place. And when you're pinning near a corner or an edge of your foam, make sure your pins are angled in toward the center. You don't want to push your pin out through the other side and accidentally poke yourself. Now we'll move across the foam and smooth our fabric out over the opposite edge. And you want to pull so that your fabric is laying nice and smooth, but you don't want to pull it super hard and distort that pattern or rip it out of the pins on the other side. So here again, we're just pinning it into the side of the foam with 3 pins. And now just repeat that for the remaining 2 sides, smoothing each of them over the edge of the foam and pinning in place with 3 pins. Once all 4 edges are pinned down, we still have these loose corners of fabric. So what we're going to do here is just give ourselves nice finished corners by pinching that corner of fabric and folding it over to one side of the foam. It doesn't matter which side you fold it over to, you just want to smooth it out and pin it down. And you're going to do that with all 4 corners. And again, it doesn't matter if you fold it to the left or to the right. I like to fold them toward the same side, but it doesn't really make a huge difference. And just like that, the first layer of our ornament is finished. To get ready for the second layer, we're going to place a couple of marker pins. You can see on your finished ornament that this blue triangle cuts diagonally across the square. So we're just going to make some measurements to make sure that our triangle is cutting across each side equally. Measuring in from the top right corner, you want to place a marker pin at the 3/4 inch mark. So at this top right corner, I have the edge of my foam lined up with the 3/4 inch mark, and where the end of my tape measure is on the skinny side of the foam, I'm just placing a marker pin. You only need to push it in about halfway. It's just a reference point, and we're going to remove it before we're finished. And now do the same for the bottom left corner. So I'm just turning to the right here. My pin is at the bottom right, and at this top left corner, the edge of my tape measure is lined up with the edge of my foam, and at the 3/4 inch mark, I'm just placing a marker pin about halfway into the foam. Now you can see that these 2 marker pins are marking where the edge of our triangle is going to cross over our square. With a 4 by 4 inch square of fabric number 2, Hold this on the diagonal with the pattern side facing away from you and fold in half so that two corners meet each other. So you folded your square in half to make a triangle. And now we're going to use this folded edge of our triangle and line it up with those marker pins. So down here at that bottom left marker pin on the edge of the square, I'm just letting the folded edge of my fabric just touch that marker pin, and I want to overlap it a little so that I can pin it into the side of the square later. And then I'm moving up across the ornament, and at the top here, again, just letting the folded edge touch that marker pin. So down here at the bottom corner, once I have my fabric in place, I'm just pinning that corner, and then I'm going to bring it up and across so that it is just barely touching two marker pins, the folded edge, and then I'm going to pin down that remaining corner as well. And now you want to keep this smooth. You don't want to tug it so hard because it'll come out of place. You want it to stay lined up with those marker pins just to give us the right size triangle. And you're just going to use a few pins to gently hold down the edge of that fabric. So I'm just using about 3 pins along each raw edge here, just smoothing that over the edge of the foam and pinning the raw edges in place. And once that is pinned down, we again need to give ourselves a nice folded corner here. So I'm just pinching both layers of this corner and folding it over to one side of the foam. It doesn't matter which side you use, and pinning that corner in place. Once your blue triangle is pinned in place, you can remove those marker pins, and layer 2 is finished. Now we just need to add our white stripes. With one of your 12.5-inch pieces of white trim, you're going to start by connecting 2 corners, and you're not going to use the whole piece of trim for this. You're going to use it for all 3 stripes. So I'm just connecting these top right and the bottom left corner of my foam with this white piece of trim, and you want it to fold over the corner just a little bit, about 1/4 of an inch or so that you can pin it in place on the side of the foam. That way we can hide our pins and raw edges later. And I'm using 2 pins to hold my trim in place, and make sure you're pinning through a thick part of the trim so that it stays held down. If your trim is kind of unraveling, it'll pull right off that pin. So you want to make sure you're really securing it. And then bring it across the ornament. I'll trim that extra little bit off later, but gently bring it across the ornament to the top right corner. Fold it over that corner just like you did at the bottom, and pin in place. Now you will cut off this remaining piece of trim, and we're gonna use it for our bottom 2 stripes as well. I have this bit that's unraveling, so I'm just gonna clip that off too. With this remaining piece of trim, fold this in half and cut it at the center so that you now have 2 pieces of trim. And you can just lay these on your ornament to sort of eyeball how far apart you want them. The distance usually ends up being about 1/2 inch between each stripe, but everyone's trim and everyone's foam might be just slightly different sizes, so you can just take the time to eyeball that and make sure your stripes are pretty much equally spaced. Also, if your trim has a pattern on it, mine is sort of pointing with these V's and these swirls on the end. I'm just making sure that each time I pin my trim down, it's facing the same way instead of pointing downward and then pointing upward. I think that just makes it look a little bit more finished. But once you have your trim right where you want it, You're going to fold it over the edge of the foam and pin in place with 2 pins. And then again, just smooth it across the ornament, keeping it parallel with that first stripe. Fold it over the edge again and pin in place with 2 pins. And you could pin about 1/4 of an inch down from the edge of the foam. We can trim off any extra trim that's hanging over the edge. Do that one more time with your last little stripe here. And once all 3 stripes are where you want them, you can trim off any extra little trim pieces that are hanging past those pins. And with that, side 1 of your ornament is finished. You are now going to flip your cube over and complete the second side of the foam exactly the same way as we did the first side. So starting with your 5 by 5 inch square of fabric number 1, center this over your foam and make sure to pin down all of the 4 sides, making sure that your fabric is nice and smooth and pulled taut over the foam without pulling too hard. Once all 4 sides are pinned down, pinch the corners of your fabric and fold them over to one side of the foam and pin them as well. Now layer 1 is finished, and before we can add layer 2, we're going to place a couple of marker pins. So just make sure that on the other side of your ornament you have the blue at the top. When you flip that over, keeping the blue at the top, you'll measure in from the top right corner by 3/4 of an inch and place a marker pin on the side of the foam. Same for the bottom left corner, measuring in and at the 3/4 inch mark, placing a marker pin pushed in about halfway. With your 4 by 4 inch square of fabric number 2, fold this in half diagonally so that the pattern side is facing out and that you've made a triangle. And lay this triangle on your ornament so that on the edges, that folded edge just barely touches the marker pins that you placed. So up here at the top and down here at the bottom, the folded edge of my triangle is just brushing that 3/4 inch pin. Once you have that folded edge lined up, just pin the corner in place and then bring it across down to that bottom pin and pin in place. And now, keeping that triangle in place, use another 3 pins to hold down the raw edges on the side of the foam. And then to finish it off, just pinch that corner of fabric and fold it over to one side and pin it down as well. Once layer 2 is added, you can remove those marker pins. Using another 12.5 inch piece of white trim, you're going to connect those 2 corners with a diagonal line, folding the trim over the edge and pinning into the side of the foam, and bringing it down to meet that opposite corner and pinning again. Cut off that remaining trim and then cut this piece in half, fold it in half and cut it at the center so that you have 2 more pieces. And then line those up to make your remaining 2 stripes and pin them into the side of the foam. Once all of your stripes are added, just snip off any extra bits of trim hanging over the edge. And now that both sides of our ornament are covered, we can go ahead and add the bands around the middle to cover up our raw edges and pins. With a 3 by 12.5 inch strip of fabric number 1, hold this horizontally with the pattern side facing away from you and fold in thirds lengthwise. You won't be able to fold the entire piece at once probably, but you can work with just the first few inches, folding each side in about a third of the way and creasing the fold. And now looking at your ornament, you want the blue triangle to be in the top left corner. So this is the top of your ornament. On that top side, you're going to flip your band over so that the raw edges of the fabric are facing downward away from you, and line up the short edge centered on top of the ornament, and the band should be centered within the side of the square foam as well. We're adding 2 more bands to the outside, so if this doesn't cover all of the raw edges and pins, that's fine. We just want to add that first center layer of the band. When the short edge is centered, pin it in place with 3 pins along that short raw edge. And now, keeping your band folded in thirds, you're going to wrap it all the way around. So to do this, I like to flip mine over so that I can see my raw edges and keep them folded. And then just use some tension on that square foam to wrap the band all the way around the foam. So you just keep wrapping, folding and wrapping around each side until you've returned to the starting point. And again, centered with the top of your foam, you're going to pin with 3 pins, overlap that first spot just a little bit, and then trim off any extra that you have there. Now we're going to add 2 skinnier bands to cover the remaining raw edges and pins. So with a 1.5 by 12.5 inch strip of fabric number 2, flip this over and again fold in thirds lengthwise. Since this is a smaller piece of fabric, this will be a skinnier band. And you only need to work with a few inches at a time. Returning to the top center of your ornament, lay this band centered. The short edge should be centered in the middle, but the folded edges are going to line up with the edge of the foam. So we're going to do 1 on each side, and it should just overlap that first band as well. So we're going to center that and pin it in place with 2 pins. And now, just like you did before, keep folding and wrapping all the way around the ornament. So I'm folding it in thirds and then wrapping it around, keeping it in line with the edge of the foam. Just like that, I've wrapped it around each side, pulling nice and tight so that it lays smooth. And then you're going to, again, pin with 2 pins and trim off the excess fabric. Now repeat those steps 1 more time to add that same band to the other edge of the ornament. Once you've added all 3 fabric bands to the edge of your ornament, we're going to add our final piece of white trim. And again, you're just going to start that in the top center of the ornament, centered across all of your bands as well, pinning in place with 2 pins and wrapping all the way around just to add some extra embellishment to the outside. When you return to the top, pin in place. And trim off any extra trim. Now we'll top off your ornament with some ribbon bows. With a 24-inch piece of ribbon, put the ends together and form a fold at the center. And at this center fold, cut so that you now have 2 equal pieces of ribbon. Holding those together, fold in half and cut again so that now you have 4. Now one more time, fold them, but this time do not cut. At that center point, you want to pin through all 4 pieces of ribbon. So you're pressing a pin through that middle point through all 4 pieces. Flip your pin over and spread those 4 pieces of ribbon out on the pin. One by one, fold each end of your ribbon back onto the pin. Once all 8 ends are folded back onto the pin, flip it over and now you can see that you've made a super cute bow, and you're going to pin this on the top center of your ornament. So you're covering those raw edges and pins from your bands, and you added the first layer of your bow. Complete those same steps with 2 more 24-inch pieces of ribbon to make 2 more bows. And once you've made those 2 additional bows, you're just going to layer them right on top of the bow you already made. So pinning, I want to do my white in the middle, pinning that bow right over top the center of the previous one, and then adding your third and final piece. And now you have an adorable tiered bow on top of your ornament. To add the stars to the blue section of your flag, you're going to use 6 stars on each side. So you can see here, you do 3 at the top, 2 in the middle, and 1 at the bottom. So just thread a pin with your white beads and do that on each side of the ornament in the blue triangle section. You can see how that should look with your beads placed. Make sure you do that on both sides. And at this point, your ornament can be finished. Since it's on the square foam, it makes a great tabletop ornament that stands up by itself. But if you would like to add a hanger to hang the ornament, I'll show you how to do that as well. With a 10-inch piece of hanger string, put the ends together and tie a knot. Thread a pin with a bead of your choice and pin that right through the knot on the hanger string. And you can trim off these little extra pieces of string. And then returning to your ornament, you'll pin this directly over the center of the bows, covering that pin and adding a hanger to hang your ornament. Once all of your embellishments are added, your Liberty Square ornament is finished. I hope you guys really enjoyed making this. It's a perfect patriotic ornament just in time for the 4th of July and all the other festive summer holidays. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and we can't wait to see the beautiful Liberty Square ornaments that you all make. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.